What I want to do in this video is spend some time talking about the work and influence of Cecil Rhodes within this sort of first chapter of the British Empire study that we are looking at, taking us all the way up to roughly around 1890. Now, this video is going to spend some time talking about his entry into South Africa, as well as his political ascendancy towards Cape Colony premiership before expanding into Central Africa and looking at his role as part of the British South Africa Company between 1888 and 1890. And so, beginning first then, it should be just noted that as a sort of early life overview, Cecil Rhodes was born in 1853 in England. And Rhodes was sent to South Africa in 1870 due to a number of health issues. His work in South Africa initially involved being a cotton farmer in Natal, which he soon then shifted to becoming a burgeoning, focusing on the burgeoning diamond fields in Kimberley. By 1873, he was prospecting in Kimberley, where he began acquiring his own mining claims. His premiership with Charles Rudd led to the partnership with Charles Rudd led to the formation of the De Beers Mining Company in 1880, at which point which later then became De Beers Consolidated Mines by 1888. So he sort of rose through the ranks, really, of the sort of the classic capitalist imperialist of the South African period, beginning in cotton farming and then starting to shift his focus towards diamond mining, and then forming and founding his own corporation, which is then becomes part of De Beers Consolidated Mines, consolidating the control over the majority of the world's diamonds production. So it wasn't a small company, this was a big endeavour. The majority of the diamond production that had been taking place in the world in the 1880s was done under the consolidated work of De Beers Consolidated Mines from 1888 onwards. During this time period as well, Rhodes would spend time entering politics, and his political ascendancy begins when he enters politics in 1881. He represents Berkeley West in the Cape Colony Parliament. By 1890, he becomes the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony. And it was during this time period, during his tenure here, that he would start to implement a number of policies which would favour Dutch farmers. These policies introduced measures that restricted African land ownership, that restricted African voting rights, and also initiated the construction of the Cape to Cairo Railway. The aim here was to try and connect British territories from the southern to northern tip of Africa. Quite an extensive endeavour, no doubt. We go further then, from 1888 to 1890, sort of later on during this time period as well, we can start to see some of the work that he does that sort of mingles and merges his political ascendancy with his sort of corporate desires for expansion of his company. So, for example, in 1888, Rhodes secured the Rudd concession from King Lobengula of Matabele. This was essentially granting mining rights over a very specific part of Africa, specifically Mashonaland. Now, he utilises this concession to establish the British South Africa Company in 1889 and obtained the Royal Charter from the British government in doing so. Now, the British South Africa Company was instrumental because it was foundational to the colonisation of territories north of Transvaal and establishing what would then become Rhodesia. Rhodesia is now, of course, Zimbabwe and Zambia collectively, but Rhodesia, of course, was one of the most controversial aspects of the later period of the British Empire when we talk about the sort of white racist settler colonial projects that existed well into the 1940s, 1950s, and into the 1960s, which we'll get to later on, and in fact sort of concludes our lessons on the British Empire. But so it's very, very important that this early work that he does, even though Cecil Rhodes will come back into the fold later on in our studies, because we're going to be spending more time talking about him during later periods of colonial enterprise. But this early period shows not only the political ascendancy of Cecil Rhodes, but also the interrelationship between political ascendancy and his role as the director of a company that obtains royal charter, which then contributes to the expansion of colonization in territories north of the Transvaal, and eventually leads to the establishment of Rhodesia, one of the most important and everlasting dark periods of the British Empire's legacy, which of course is now Zimbabwe and Zambia.